This show is a member of the Planetside Podcast Network. To learn more, go to planetsidepodcasts.com.
Welcome to I Shouldn't Have to Say This, the podcast where we discuss topics we believe requires critical and nuanced thinking. If you want to get in touch with us, you can email us at saythiscast@gmail.com or follow us on Twitter at saythiscast or go to saythiscast.com to hear previous episodes.
Hey, party podcast people. It is I, your uncancelable host, Nicole. And I'm joined here today by my co-host, Genre.
Yo, and so you're uncancelable?
Bull, yes. So when
I uncancelable?
So when you disagree with me about this episode, listener, just remember there's nothing that you can fucking do, but maybe not listen again. I don't know.
Don't do that. Don't tell the people that. What are you doing?
I mean, if they hate me and what I'm saying, they should not listen, or they can hate listen. I guess engagement works. Dislike the video if you're on YouTube, or leave us a 1-star review. I love it. I
am okay with hate with people hate listening on.
I love engagement.
Hey, you know what? The world is better when people can disagree.
Oh no, I'm just saying the algorithm loves engagement.
Oh, I mean, that's true, too. Yeah, definitely.
So it doesn't matter if you like it or not. It all helps me. So remember, honey, if you hate me, remember to @ me. Jack of 3 trades, that's 3 is in the number. Anyway, we're talking about abolition and the issues that I have accumulated over a number of years of being in abolitionist spaces and just kind of generally out and about amongst the prison abolitionists. And this also applies to police abolitionists. They're often the same exact group of people, but they're slightly different issues. I really don't think that anybody is out here championing one but without the other. Because that would make no goddamn sense. But
I love cops and I hate prisons. What do the cops do? Beat people? Okay.
Can they make arrests? No.
No, because you don't know where they're gonna put the people, are they?
But I love cops. They should be able, I guess that would just be, never mind. So we're not going down that road.
Where are we going though? What's our target?
Our target is talking about my issues, giving my critique, and then giving my alternative. So
sounds good.
I want to start this episode by indicating to anybody who might be a little bit have a knee-jerk reaction to this topic by saying, like, you don't really understand abolitionists, by demonstrating that I do. And also, I guarantee you I have more degrees and time in these spaces than you. 2 of them, in fact. Actually, I had 3 majors in college, most of them related to this topic. So
Jesus, all right.
You can absolutely @ me about this. I don't believe you. And also, I've read all abolitionist literature, and it all says the same exact thing, but we'll get into that in a second. Demonstrating that I know what I'm talking about. So, when abolitionists are advocating for the end of the carceral system, let's just call it that, they're typically doing that from a place where they view everybody in prison or who's ever had an interaction with a cop as a victim. The ultimate injustice of the justice system is the prisoners who are put in prison, because prison is inherently inhumane and it is bad. And even if prison wasn't a miserable hellscape, for a human being, a creature with the ability to tell when they are free and when they are not free, being deprived of one's freedom is one of the highest forms of psychological harm that you can do to a person, especially over a prolonged period of time. And I want to say at this point, I agree. These are all true. However, I think that this leaves them with a sort of gap in their thinking and when they're communicating with people who aren't already abolitionists. Because for most people in society, and I would say that I also agree with this, that the highest priority is not to ensure that everybody is free. The highest priority in society is to make sure that when you walk down the street or when you're engaging in risky behaviors, that you feel safe. safety is the number one priority. Most abolitionists are driven by the core injustice of prison. They really see depriving somebody of one's freedom as an axiomatic evil. And I have to agree. One of the great psychic harms that you can do to a human being is to tell them that they aren't free and to deprive them of the freedom to do what they want. Most of us suffer under those circumstances.
Humans are social animals. It's part of our DNA. It's part of like how we stay psychologically stable.
Oh, I'm saying even if you were to deprive somebody of one's freedom and put them in a room with their favorite 10 people and they could do whatever they want, they would still feel sad because they couldn't have the freedom to leave the room.
Yes, definitely.
So I'm saying that I think that most abolitionists probably think that this is the worst thing that you can do to a person almost. Putting somebody in prison and depriving them of their sense of freedom is a fundamental psychic harm that you can do to a person. And if you think about it, when you put a child in timeout, they're not going through any sort of harm other than the fact that if they get up and they start walking, that you'll put them back. So this is something that we see emotionally as really bad from a really early age.
I can tell you exactly like a good example. As I've said before, I'm disabled, so I actually don't leave the house that much because I can't. But because of the pandemic, that ability to choose to leave if I want has been limited, and that is actually harmful. Like I probably wouldn't go out, but I always had the choice to go out, and now I don't.
Yeah, that's definitely more extreme than I think able-bodied people have been going through, but for a lot of us, too, the people who've been observing COVID procedures and trying to stay safe, a lot of people say, I didn't leave the house before, but, now that I can't, it feels terrible.
Exactly. Exactly.
So it's the choice to be free. It's the idea of freedom that's important to us.
Mm-hmm.
So fundamentally, I agree that freedom is really important to our emotional well-being, and taking somebody's freedom away for long periods of time is bad for us. Whatever behavior you don't like, isolating somebody and taking away their sense of freedom and treating them like a caged animal isn't going to improve their situation. I don't like prisons, which is why I'm still an abolitionist. But I think that this preoccupation with the fundamental injustice of imprisoning a person alienates abolitionists from the rest of society. Because for the rest of society, freedom is not the most important thing. Or rather, there's another thing that supports our sense of freedom that we really value, and that's safety. So if you're a free American and you're walking around, you can feel pretty safe. But if a guy is standing on the corner with a sawed-off shotgun pointing it directly at you, then you feel a little bit less free, because freedom without safety isn't really freedom. So most people want a safe society. The problem is, abolitionists aren't really that preoccupied with safety. Or at least it's certainly secondary to their concern about freedom. And this makes them super dismissive of anybody who is interested in safety. And that sucks because it means the movement doesn't grow easily. Because, you can't meet people where they are.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, every time somebody mentions that there's an abolitionist, they don't believe in prisons, to somebody who's never been introduced to the subject, the answer that they usually get is, what about rapists? What about pedophiles? What about murderers? And immediately and condescendingly, the abolitionist turns around and they say, well, rapists don't get time now. And you're like, so we abolish prisons so they get no? I want to put more of them in jail. And they say, well, prison's immoral. And they're like, I don't want my rapist on the street. And they're like, that's fine, but things might have happened to your rapist that made them into a rapist. And they're like, okay, that's fine, but I don't care. And then they say
it just snowballed. I mean, this is the problem with an all or nothing attitude about something. Like it for the most part, having a solid opinion with no room for conversation or anything. It's just this or nothing is not really conducive to helping people along to your point of view.
Yeah. And if that sounds extreme, I have a literal story. It's not mine to tell. I think I want to interview this person on the show, so maybe that'll happen one day and they can tell their own story. But until then, let's just leave it at, they were incredibly dismissive of their concerns. It also makes a lot of abolitionist spaces extremely hostile towards survivors, because amongst survivors of sexual assault, there's often this rhetoric of kill your rapist. And it's not really literally kill your rapist in some cases, but it's people unapologetically being like, this person sucks, they ruined my life and I hate them and I don't feel any sort of need to stop saying to forgive them because they fucked me up. Like, I'm really fucked up. And that type of shit is tough for abolitionists to handle because, no matter how bad a person is, they'll often say restorative justice is the answer. But there are a lot of people that people just, casually know will never change, or they can't believe it. If you talk to a guy who gets beaten by their dad for their entire life, if they think that their dad could be redeemed through a restorative justice process, they'll probably look at you and go like, bitch, what the fuck are you talking about?
I'm sorry. No.
And
no.
It's, and abolitionists quite frequently just kind of shrug that off and say, like, you don't understand abolition. You don't understand restorative justice. Or my favorite, I'm also a socialist. And if we abolish the police and prisons alongside a gigantic social program, then we'll...
Oh my God.
Then there'll be no rapists and there'll be no murderers. And I'm like... Greg,
hold on. Are these real people?
Yes, there are a lot of people who I have literally met.
Someone that, wow.
So they really think that there's going to be such a negligible number of criminals in the post-socialist society that we can just stop doing activities which ensure our safety or provide punishments to those, or accountability, not punishments, to those who fuck up.
Jesus Christ.
That's really frustrating because
it's dumb.
We're not in alternatives right now. But this is really frustrating shit to me because it chases victims of sexual assault out of these spaces pretty fucking intensely. There's only so much that you can do. I know somebody who was part of a abolitionist group and they paid the bail of this guy who abused his girlfriend. Because, nobody deserves to be in jail. And he comes out of jail and he immediately goes and kills his girlfriend.
Gee, shocker.
Yeah. And that's really frustrating because that's the level of people that we're sometimes dealing with. And, when I bring up these frustrations when I'm face to face with an abolitionist, they'll often tell me to go read this book or this book. And this will give me an alternative to a carceral system or some shit. And I'll go and I'll read that book, and it will say the same shit. There are a lot of people in the abolitionist movement who think that there's never a type of person who commits harm against others for no reason, which bullshit. We all respond to stimuli differently. But the murderer in Florida who was an incel who killed all of those sorority girls because he never got his dick sucked had a reason. It was because he never got his dick sucked. But that doesn't mean I don't want him under the prison, Mm-hmm. So when I mention these types of things, oftentimes abolitionists will signal me to go seek out abolitionist literature because that has the answers to the questions that I'm looking for. And I usually look at them and I say, is it going to tell me that people commit crimes for reasons? Because I fucking know that. Is it going to tell me that rapists literally just go to jail, don't go to jail now, therefore abolition, which doesn't follow? And they say, no, it's new. It doesn't do that. So following that thread, I picked up a book called We Do This Till We Free by Mariam Kaba, who a scholar and thinker about abolition who I really respect. However, abolitionist literature is still at a 101 level. If this is the best that people can point you to, which oftentimes it is, it says, rapists are people too. There will be less rapists in a more just world, which is true. We need to look at the why of why people commit crimes. And, there are exceptions. There are whys that are not valid for certain types of crimes. There are people who are too dangerous to let walk around us. And abolitionists never offer any sort of substantive criticism to, or response to these criticisms, rather. It's consistently the same: rapists don't go to jail now, or there'll be less criminals when we start treating people better. And when people say, what about this exception? They say, well, you're in bad faith because you're mentioning an exception. It's like, well, it's not an unbelievable exception.
It's really just when you say, I don't think prisons should exist, then when someone says, but what about this example, they're not saying like this is a single person. It's just, like if someone's giving an example of someone that they think should be kept away from society, that's going to be hundreds of people. It just sounds like when you're talking to these abolitionists that are all or nothing, is they just consider like, what about a rapist? Then they just consider like one person and thinking about this one person that they're going to incarcerate. And they don't want that, instead of just the example of these people that do exist and will always exist.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I think that frustrates me about abolitionists is that I don't think that they realize that they aren't concerned with public safety. Because if they were, then they would give these concerns credence. The fact that they just so readily throw out a non-answer and keep it pushing, or direct you towards literature swearing that it says something different and it says the same exact bullshit. And that's really frustrating for me. So over the years, I've been thinking about alternative strategies. Like, how do you meet people where they are? And this is really fucking sick. This is Chad as fuck.
Let's go. Let's hear it.
Prisons and police officers do not make our society safer.
What?
Prisons have...
What?
Yeah. Prisons have... prisons around the world, but I'm going to talk about the United States, have a abysmal recidivism rate. People who go to prison end up going back to prison quite often because they come out to a society where they can't get a job because they have a record, or because, there was zero intervention for the reasons why they went to prison, or they go to prison and they learn how to actually do crime. So where before they were like selling cigarettes, now they're selling heroin or some shit.
Yeah, now they know how to pick locks.
Yeah, like my grandpa was a lawyer back in the just the entire 20th century. The man's almost 100. And he saw so many guys go to prison. Like he talked about one of the biggest, baddest gangsters in the late 20th century in Chicago. And he said, I defended him in his first trial. And this kid just jacked something. And, beforehand, I saw him around and he would go behind the rival gangs and he would flick them in the back of the head and keep running. And they would have these fist fights. When he got out, it was guns and it was drugs. So it's that type of shit. Prisons suck. They make a lot of people worse, and a lot of people who were bad to begin with just stayed exactly as bad because these places don't give them shit. Now, how about cops? Well, let's set aside police behavior for a second, even though that's a serious issue, and we should talk about how much shit cops just casually steal from people. Because they casually steal a lot of shit from people, and it's really hard to get it back. But the other part is that cops fucking don't seem to have that much with the crime rate in any city. So I know that might be a little bit hard to believe, or maybe it's not, but let's talk about it. So in the United States, we have a lot of crime. Violent crime offenses in the U.S. per 100,000 people from 1986 to 2020. A lot of people think that the last decade has been really dangerous, absolutely awful for the crime rate. And, if we look at the actual statistics, in 86 it was pretty high. It was around 600 violent crime offenses per 100,000 people. Then it peaked around 1992, 2 years before I was born, at nearly
Jesus
800
Christ.
violent crime offenses per 100,000 people. And it continued around that level until it started tapering it off around the year of my birth, which is not a coincidence. It was me, in fact, who stopped. I'm sorry.
It was me, Barry.
It was me who stopped crime, and from then on, you kind of see the crime rate drop exponentially. The crime rate just starts dropping. There's a small bump up in 2008. And then it starts falling after 2010 when our economy stabilized. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm giving away the secret. And then it starts going down until 2018. And then there's a little bit of a bump in 2020. Now, during this entire time, I mean, I don't know this for a fact, but I think that it would be hard to make the argument that police budgets went down at any point. In Chicago, every year, cops get a budget increase. It doesn't matter what the crime rate's doing. If the crime rate's down, give them more resources to keep it there. If the crime rate's up, give them more resources to bring it down. If it doesn't go down when we give them more resources, then we give them more resources. If it stays down, then we give them more resources. There's no way that cops stop getting resources.
Right.
We don't start. So, for me, cops have very little to do with safety. It's not really about whether or not they're cruel to people. It's that they don't seem to do what we tell them to do. For me, I think that it's very valuable as an abolitionist to make your argument as though you would support literally anything if it made society safer. So what I'll often say is, hey, listen, I'm not like those other fucking abolitionists. I want a safe society too. If you told me that I could whip somebody, give them 100 lashes and set them on their way and they'd never commit another crime, then I'd support giving somebody 100 lashes. The fact remains that giving somebody 100 lashes isn't going to stop them from committing crimes.
Right.
So, the things that we have right now don't seem to do that much. The wealth inequality doesn't seem that great for crime rates. It seems like the crime rate falls when people have the means to fend for themselves, which often in the United States has a direct correlation to the employment rate. So, my alternative for arguing for the abolition of police and prisons is, those don't work. You can't say that prisons work, they don't. You can't say that cops work, they don't. Now, if you think that we should settle for bullshit, that's fine, but I'm not a pussy, so I think that we should try to go for more. In the limited situations that we've used restorative justice in, we've seen pretty decent results. The fact remains that in order for restorative justice to work, that people need to want to go through that process and to be open to it. So that's one caveat. We shouldn't do it for everybody. If you walked up to the Green River killer and you asked him, hey, buddy, are you super, super sorry? Do you want to go through this rehabilitation process? He'd probably say yeah, but he was like 76 sex workers deep into his rap sheet, so...
Yeah, I'd love to do some restorative justice. Then I get out and kill more people. That's cool.
Yeah, so, judicious use of restorative justice can work. Fines are really useful. You want to know what stops people from doing crimes? Taking their fucking money, making them pay for shit. If somebody steals, if somebody embezzles, you shouldn't put them in prison. You should make them pay that shit off. There's no reason why anybody who commits a nonviolent offense should be sitting in fucking prison. Because there's absolutely no way for somebody sitting in a fucking prison to make amends. During the 2008 financial crisis, they put one guy in prison and they let the others go scot-free. And I'm not saying they should have went to prison, even though they caused an absurd amount of trouble. They should have had every single check they ever gained and every asset they had garnished to pay it towards the families' lives who they ruined. Yeah,
that makes sense.
I mean, it makes more sense to me than anything else. And, fines are bad for the poor. So, if you're an abolitionist and you're thinking about that, yes, I know. So for me, I think that past a certain income level, fines should stop being a dollar amount and start being a percentage of your total assets.
What if you have no assets?
Past a certain point.
Ah.
And probably under a certain point. If you have like under like $20,000 to your name and somebody's asking you for $500, that's fucked up. You should probably just take a percentage of what they have to pay restitutions towards whatever they stole. Like, they stole a piece of bread, they should pay for the bread. But, you know, I forget what group it was, but they had a concert in the middle of the pandemic in New York, and New York fined them $25,000. I think it might have been the Chainsmokers. I can't remember. But they fined them $25,000 and they were selling a ticket for $25,000. So,
Wow.
They made back their money, you know, on that fine if they sold one ticket, which they absolutely fucking did.
I mean, that's the same thing with corporations that dump illegally, or large companies that, or like banks that screw things up. You know, there's a specific fine that they have to pay, and they're like, fine. But if they did a percentage of their assets or a percentage of their income, especially over the course of time, like a large percentage, then people would think twice, because the way you convince someone to do something, sometimes you just gotta like mess with their money.
Yeah, to that point, the producers of Oxycontin got ruled against, I think, in the amount of $40 million. That's what they had to pay to all of the families who they ruined with Oxycontin. $40 million doesn't begin to get anywhere close to what they made off of selling Oxycontin to people. You haven't even cut into their revenue at that point. It's a drop in the bucket.
Also, that was taken out of the company. But the actual family that owns the company, they were protected.
They should lose their company. I mean, I'm being hyperbolic, but they should lose the company itself should lose a massive part of its profits, of its revenue. It should have to sell off businesses in order to survive, you know? It should be, it's not only that you don't get to profit off of the pain that you cause people. You have to pay all that money back. It's that you should also have to pay restitutions. So whatever they made off of Oxycontin, you should charge them twice as much. So fines can work. Restorative justice can work. I believe that we will always need people to investigate things that go wrong. So detectives, but they don't have to be fucking cops. I mean, there are plenty of investigators, 2 white girls with a podcast, solving crimes better than any fucking cop can right now.
2 white girls with a podcast.
And I
mean, you're not wrong.
I'm not wrong. I'm just saying the way that we think about detectives and how they exist in the police system, detectives can exist in a system without cops, and we should have them. Detectives don't need to have guns, but detectives right now are dumb fucks. They'll hook you up to a lie detector knowing that shit is bad science and inadmissible in a court, and they'll deadass believe the results of the lie detector like it tells you anything. They might as well flip a fucking coin at that point. Detectives suck. Everything about the culture of investigations right now just is bad. So that needs some work, but that's part of why I'm an abolitionist. I think that we have to start over, because a lot of these threads that happen in law enforcement right now are irredeemable, and you can give them whatever rules you want. They refuse to change. But, you know, even saying all of that, there will be people who will say, what happens when you have somebody with a gun? The other thing is providing people with the means to support themselves works. So, you know, if you have a problem with teenagers like getting out after school or skipping school altogether and selling drugs and doing all sorts of risky behaviors, the answer is not to put them in jail. It's to figure out something for them to do, and it's to make sure that they don't feel like they need to be the breadwinner for their fucking family. In 2017, there is a job program that they rolled out for teenagers, like just, you know, to give them a little like part-time job.
Mm-hmm.
And the rate of crime amongst the people who were enrolled in that program dropped.
Shocking.
Idle hands, man. They aren't good. You got to give people shit to do, and also you have to make sure they don't feel desperate. So these are all things that work. We know they work. And also, social workers going out and talking to people and dealing with the vast majority of crime that happens or public disturbances works from the data that we have so far. In Denver, the STAR program has been doing quite well. I need to check up on it because it's been a few months, but the first 6 months were incredibly promising. Nobody was arrested, nobody got fucked up, and the primary thing that the social workers that were involved in that program were saying is, these people need food, they need water, they need mental health care. They do not need a prison. Because a lot of times they were going and finding like old confused men walking through a restricted area. All you got to do is walk them out of the restricted area and give them a hamburger. Like shit. This is the type of stuff that works. But, and this is where I'm a Chad, I also think that a guy with a gun will sometimes be required, but almost never.
It's a really rare occurrence, especially with the crime rate that we have in this country.
Yeah. Most crimes are not violent, like just flat out. Most crimes aren't violent. You don't need a gun. For violent crimes, you probably do need a gun. But the guy with a gun doesn't need to go out patrolling for violent crime. They need to stand in one place so you know where they are so you can get them when you need them. And
like they used to.
I don't think that that's a high, it's like an unachievable bar, but a lot of abolitionists are unwilling to even say, if somebody were to like pick up a gun and brandish it at this other person, I do think that somebody should intervene. A lot of people think that community defense is the best thing. And let me tell you, slight aside, but if you think that it would be better if we solved all problems peer to peer, you're an idiot. Like, I have the utmost respect for most abolitionists, but not people who think that we should be solving interpersonal and legal issues peer to peer, because that's how people get killed. I always think that we should have somebody to defer to. It's just those people have to not be power crazed and definitely not have the ability to murder us on the scene. So there's that. And finally, if somebody were to say, what happens if, you did your big jobs program and you did all of this reform and there were no cops, except for the one guy with a gun who stands in the corner with a dunce cap on his head till you need him. And you have all your fines and somebody picks up a gun and they brandish it at somebody and you got a rapist, like an R. Kelly type, like somebody who knows what they're doing is wrong, has never shown any intention or interest in stopping, does not give a shit, denies until they die, is an absolute shit sack. I would say, faulty wiring. We don't understand it. There's a reason why even R. Kelly did what he did. He was an abused child, but none of that is an excuse, and my priority is safety, so in the prison he goes. But, important caveat, my friends, and we're going to circle all the way back to the beginning of the episode. A loss of freedom, the knowledge that you are not free, is enough of a punishment for anybody. You do not need to torture them. You do not need to feed them crap. You can treat them like people. And, a prisoner will still suffer if they're living a completely normal life, if they know that they can't mix it up the next day. There's no spice of life. You cannot leave the premises. All of that shit sucks so much that you don't need to do a single thing more to them. You don't need to harm a hair on their head. You don't need to torture them. You don't need to put them in isolation. You don't need to do shit. All you need to do
their freedom away and
is put them in a room with a TV and a computer and the knowledge that they are being watched and that they cannot leave the room. That's enough. And that's that's a Chad fucking thing. I haven't made that argument to anybody who's not like completely deranged, who hasn't said like, oh, well, if that's what abolitionists said, then I guess I'd be an abolitionist.
Yeah, it's not that hard.
Yeah. But also another thing that bothers me is that, these are all high, lofty goals that I've set out here. We cannot flip a switch. A lot of people think that we should abolish the police and prisons right now and let everybody out. I completely fucking disagree. Oh my God. That sounds like a terrible fucking
Just
idea.
let
Are you
everybody
kidding
out.
me?
Okay.
Just let them out.
Without any training, without like some people been there for decades, without any support, without any
prison fucks people up. They need therapy.
It's psychological torture.
Yeah. So I think that there's a really obvious and nuanced way to offer up a plan of police abolition. And it's going to sound like incrementalism, and that's because it is. But frankly, this is what we have to do. The police get an increase to their budget every year. So what happens if one year in my city, I'm going to talk about my city. What happens if one year we just decided, rather than increase the police budget, we're going to take that money and we're going to invest in the community. We're just going to try and get people some jobs. We're going to finally fund the units of social workers. We're going to give this a real try and give them a real budget. And we're going to see what happens. And that's a trial. We're giving them a trial opportunity. And then we watch what happens. And when it works, because I believe beyond a shadow of a doubt that it will work, or we'll see promising results, the next year we continue to raise it. And if we continue to see better results than we're getting from the police, then we keep raising it. And at a certain point, if, the crime rate is low and we don't need as many people roaming the fucking streets with guns, then we start scaling back the police. And if we start scaling back the police so much that we no longer need them, well, oops, poof, there goes the police.
Oopsie doodle.
And if we don't have police, a lot of people aren't being imprisoned. And, if we combine this with education about the prison system, then maybe people start seeing prisoners as human beings. And maybe we start seeing prisoners as human beings, we treat them less like shit. And over time, if there are far fewer prisoners, and the money investment is way lower in keeping them, we can increase their quality of living if they must be in there. And we can work towards the society that we want without pulling the rug out from under us. But the most important thing is that this works with normies. This works. If you say, hey, I know that you're afraid of getting rid of the police because you think that they're the only thing that works. So what happens if I wasn't even recommending that we get rid of the police? What happens if I just said, let's give this a real try? We need to keep trying stuff. We don't have all the answers. We know this. So why aren't we trying new forms of dealing with violent crime if we're seeing that the old strategies aren't working? Just, testing this shit out. And also, I don't know if this shit works. You don't know if this shit works because it's never been done. We have a lot of promising trends, but what we're talking about here and what abolitionists talk about all the time has never fucking been done. So you do need to show people evidence that it works. And you can't do it with a couple of people. You can't do it with a handful of people. You need to do it with a real fucking trial. And that trial needs to have money behind it, resources, and the support of the community. So that's the episode. Just sell them on testing out different strategies and slowly sell them on abolition when they realize that it's more effective than this bullshit they've been doing forever. And, the side effect is that it's better for the people and that less people are in prison. And also, stop fucking bothering survivors, you weird motherfuckers. And that's the real episode. That's all of my issues with abolitionists. It's that y'all are crazy. And you don't really care about growing the movement because you don't pay any attention to the concerns of normal people. You're just interested in being right. And being right doesn't make our world better. Convincing other people that you're right does. So yeah. But I'm still an abolitionist, though. Fuck police. Fuck prison.
Hey, let me ask you a question. Do you love our web extras? Do you love our extra episodes that you can hear only on Patreon? Wait, you don't? You haven't heard them? Well, golly gee, I can help you out. You can go to patreon.com/saythiscast. If you sign up as a $10 patron, you'll be able to hear our wonderful, weird, funny, extra episodes about different topics. There's one about when I was canceled. There's one about my adventures with a doctor. There's stuff about should Nicole buy a video game. There's just so much there. And of course you don't want to miss that. So go to patreon.com/saythiscast. And thank you. So usually this is the time in the show where we talk about, like happy things, silly things that are distracting to us or something. But I wanted to mention something that is really important and really special. We're recording this on the first day of October. Thank God it's October. I love October. But the 29th of September would have been my uncle's 68th birthday. He passed a while ago, back in 2001, actually, January of 2001. And but he's a musician, and we had a lot in common in the music that we like to perform and like to sing, and even our voice quality. He was a really important guy, not just to me, but obviously to my entire family. My mom sent out an email that day, like saying like, oh, it was Uncle Eddie's birthday, and here's some stuff about him. And he had this song called Lady Liberty that he wrote with a friend named John Cucci. I believe that's how you pronounce it. And it's really, really good. It's an original song, and honestly, the first time I heard it, I thought it was like a cover of a Schoolhouse Rock song or something. It's about the Statue of Liberty. They wrote it when the Statue of Liberty was getting restored, and I wanted to play a little bit of it now, just to share it with you.
Walking down the river is fine by me if Lady Liberty stands by me. The dream of our world she's holding in her hand. Her silent stare is heard around from the Liberty Belt to northern towns, Patrick Fields and south across the land. The oceans around her brought immigrants that found her, bridging the gap to be free.
400 years she stood strong and tall. Then came the time for us all to help repay the debt our nation owes. Thanks to you, her new torch shines from every nickel and every dime. We brought Our Lady a brand new set of clothes. Her freedom is calling to continents to join in. As allies together we are one. When times of terror have come around, our foes try to stare us down, but we stand toe to toe and eye to eye.
Because in strength our peaceful ways must stay alive in future days for our generations to grow strong.
So that was Lady Liberty, or part of Lady Liberty, by my Uncle Eddie and his friend John Cucci. And the whole version is on YouTube, and I will link that in the description of the show and in the show notes and on the website. That is saythiscast.com. Like, listening to that and thinking about him, it was painful, but I think it's good to think about those who passed just to keep them in our memory, and also to remind us of the really great things that they did. He was a teacher. He had a great family. He was a wonderful uncle. And I just want to pay some tribute to him. So, yeah, that's all. He was really important to me, so I wanted to talk about it. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to I Shouldn't Have to Say This. We put our episodes out every 2 weeks, and you can hear them on saythiscast.com or on any podcast service that you like, or you can go on our YouTube channel, which is also linked in the show notes. We put our episodes out on podcast first, and then the week later we put the episode on YouTube, so you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're listening there, then leave a like or a comment or anything like that. Remember to subscribe and, I don't know, bell thing and everything like that. If you're listening on podcast, if you can leave reviews on your podcast service or anywhere, then that would be really, really, really helpful for the show. And of course, pass it around to your friends. Nicole, where can we find you online?
You can find me on Twitter at Jack of Three Trades. That's 3 is in the number. If you want to cancel me, remember to @ me. Quote retweets are fantastic. I love it. Where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter at PressStartLock, and you can also quote retweet me and @ me and everything. Cancel or anything. It's happened before. It'll happen again. So,
all right, you did get canceled.
Say what?
All right, you did get canceled.
I did get canceled by Tankies. That was a wild day. The music that you're hearing right now is by the One Ups. It is called Katamari Taino. It is a cover of Katamari Damacy. It's by the One Ups, and the link to purchase that song is in the show notes as well. I should have to say this is a member of the Planetside Podcast Network. To learn more, you can go to planetsidepodcasts.com.
Change your mind. I'm the first in line. Honey, I'm still free. Take a chance on me.
What?
Think maybe let me go. Take a chance on me. Ba 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 ba. Da 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 na 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 na.